The lightning split the Nevada sky like a fractured mirror, and Grace Whitmore knew she had made a terrible mistake leaving town this late in the afternoon. She urged her mare forward, but Dahlia planted her hooves in the muddy earth and refused to take another step, her ears flat against her head as the thunder rolled across the desert basin like an approaching freight train. The storm had come from nowhere, building from innocent clouds on the horizon to this churning monster in less than 20 minutes. And now the rain fell so hard Grace could barely see 10 feet ahead through the gray curtain of water. "Come on, girl," Grace pleaded, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "We cannot stay out here. Please, Dahlia, please move." But the horse only tossed her head and backed up a step, pulling against the reins with a force that nearly yanked Grace from the saddle. The mare was terrified, and Grace could feel the animal's muscles trembling beneath her legs. Another crack of lightning illuminated the landscape in harsh white light, revealing the rocky terrain and scattered sagebrush. And in that brief moment, Grace saw a figure on horseback approaching from the direction she had been heading. The rider came closer, moving with confidence despite the storm's fury. Grace could make out a tall man on a dark horse, his hat pulled low against the rain. When he was close enough to be heard over the wind, he called out to her, "Your horse won't go forward in this. She is too scared." His voice was deep and carried authority without arrogance. "I know," Grace shouted back, "but I cannot stay out here all night." The cowboy brought his horse alongside hers, and even through the rain Grace could see he was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with strong features and eyes that seemed to assess the situation with practiced efficiency. He dismounted in one smooth motion and came to Dahlia's side, his boots sinking into the mud. "What are you doing?" Grace asked. "Getting you both to safety," he said, his hands already working at the hitching of her saddle. "There is an overhang about 50 yards that way. We passed it coming up." "Your mare needs to be led, not ridden. She is too panicked." Grace felt a flash of indignation. "I have been riding since I was 6 years old. I can handle my own horse." The cowboy looked up at her, rain streaming down his face. "I am sure you can, miss, but not tonight, not in this storm. Now, you can sit there arguing with me and both end up struck by lightning, or you can trust that I know what I am doing and let me help you." There was something in his tone that was not condescending but genuinely concerned. Grace bit back her pride and nodded. The cowboy unhitched Dahlia from the saddle rigging and took the mare's bridle in his hand. He looked back at Grace, who was now sliding down from the saddle, her boots hitting the ground with a splash. "We will wait together here until she calms down enough to move," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Then we get to that shelter. My name is Nathan Ingram, by the way. Since we are about to spend some time in this miserable weather together, seemed right to introduce myself. Grace Whitmore," she said, pushing wet strands of dark hair from her face. "I live in Cherry Creek, or I did this morning. I am beginning to wonder if I will live to see it again." Nathan's mouth quirked at the corner, not quite a smile but close. "You will. I promise you that. Now stay close to Dahlia, talk to her. She needs to hear your voice and know you are not afraid." "But I am afraid," Grace admitted, surprised at her own honesty. "Then pretend you are not," Nathan said. "Horses can sense fear, but they can also sense confidence. Give her the confidence she needs right now." Grace moved to Dahlia's head and began stroking the mare's neck, murmuring soft words of reassurance. The rain continued to pour, soaking through her riding jacket and dress, but she focused on her horse and on the presence of the stranger beside her. Nathan stood patiently, one hand on his own horse's reins, the other holding Dahlia's bridle. He was completely drenched, his dark hair plastered to his head, but he seemed utterly unbothered by the discomfort. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, Dahlia's ears began to prick forward again. Her breathing, which had been rapid and panicked, started to slow. Nathan noticed immediately. "Good," he said. "She is coming back to herself. Let's move now while we have the chance. Grace, you walk beside her, I will lead. My horse, Ranger, will follow. Stay close." They began moving through the storm, a strange procession of 2 humans and 2 horses making their way across the Nevada desert in the pouring rain. Grace kept one hand on Dahlia's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal beneath her palm, drawing comfort from the contact. She watched Nathan's broad shoulders ahead of her, the way he moved with purpose and certainty through the chaos of the storm. The overhang Nathan had mentioned was a rocky outcropping that created a shallow cave, barely deep enough to be called shelter, but enough to get them out of the direct assault of the rain. Nathan led the horses under first, then gestured for Grace to follow. The space was cramped with 2 horses and 2 people, but it was dry, and that made it feel like luxury. "How did you know this was here?" Grace asked, wringing water from her skirt. "I ride this way often," Nathan said. "I work a ranch about 10 miles north of Cherry Creek, the Broken Arrow." "You might have heard of it," Grace nodded. "I have. My father used to do business with the owner. That was before he died 3 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Nathan said, and Grace could tell he meant it. There was no empty platitude in his voice, just genuine sympathy. "Thank you," she said. "What were you doing out in this weather?" "Same thing you were, I suppose, trying to get somewhere before the storm hit. I was heading to Cherry Creek on an errand for my boss. Looks like we both misjudged how fast this system would move in." He pulled off his hat and shook the water from it. "You said you left from Cherry Creek. Where were you heading?" "To the Connolly Ranch. They are friends of my family, and Mrs. Connolly asked me to bring her some fabric samples. I run a dressmaking shop in town," Grace explained. It seemed like such a simple errand this morning. The sky was clear, the weather perfect. I thought I would be there and back before supper. "Nevada weather can turn on a dime," Nathan said. "Especially this time of year. It is May, right on the edge between spring and summer. We get these sudden storms rolling off the mountains." They settled into an awkward silence, listening to the rain drum against the rock above them. Grace studied Nathan when she thought he was not looking. He had a strong jaw covered with a day's worth of stubble, and his eyes were a remarkable shade of gray-blue that reminded her of the sky just before a storm. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, white against his tanned skin, and his hands were calloused from years of ranch work. He was handsome, she realized, in that rough, weathered way that men who worked outdoors often were. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked, more to break the silence than because she expected him to know. Nathan looked out at the sheets of rain. "Hard to say. These spring storms can blow through in an hour or they can settle in for the night. We will have to wait and see. Either way, you are safe here. That is what matters." "My mother will be worried sick," Grace said. "I told her I would be home before dark. Does she know where you went?" "Yes." "She knows about the Connolly errand. Then she will figure you took shelter somewhere. Any sensible person would in this weather." Nathan shifted his position, trying to make himself comfortable on the hard ground. "Tell me about your dress shop. How long have you been running it?" Grace appreciated the attempt at conversation. It helped take her mind off the storm and her worry about her mother. "About 2 years now. I learned to sew from my mother and grandmother. After my father died, we needed income, so I turned my skill into a business. It has done better than I expected. The women in Cherry Creek and the surrounding ranches seem to appreciate having a dressmaker nearby instead of having to order everything from catalogs or travel to Reno." "That makes sense," Nathan said. "And you do good work, I assume." "I do," Grace said without false modesty. "I am particular about my stitching and the fit of my garments. Every woman deserves to feel beautiful in what she wears, regardless of whether she is going to church or just working in her kitchen." Nathan's expression softened. "That is a nice way to look at it. My mother would have liked you. She always said that a woman's appearance was her armor, her way of facing the world with dignity." "Would have?" Grace asked gently. "She passed when I was 19. Fever took her one winter. It was fast, at least." "She did not suffer long." Nathan's voice was matter-of-fact, but Grace could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I am sorry," she said. "Losing a parent is never easy, no matter how old you are when it happens." "No," Nathan agreed. "It is not." Another silence fell between them, but this one was more comfortable. The silence of two people who had shared something meaningful. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the desert, but inside their small shelter, Grace felt oddly safe. It was strange to feel that way with a man she had just met, a stranger who had appeared out of the storm like something from a story. Yet there was something about Nathan Ingram that inspired trust. Maybe it was the way he had immediately taken charge of the situation without being overbearing. Maybe it was the gentleness in his voice when he spoke of his mother. Or maybe it was simply the fact that he had unhitched her panicked horse and said they would wait together, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to stand in a storm with a stranger and offer comfort. "Do you have family besides your mother?" Nathan asked. "Brothers or sisters?" "Just my mother and me now," Grace said. "I had a younger brother, Thomas, but he died when he was only 8, influenza. That was 11 years ago, but my mother still mourns him as if it were yesterday." "Some losses never fully heal," Nathan observed. "We just learn to carry them better." "That is very true," Grace said, struck by the wisdom in his simple statement. "What about you? Any siblings?" "A younger sister, Nora. She is 22, married to a good man who runs a livery stable in Reno. They have a baby daughter, my niece Clara. I do not get to see them as often as I would like, but I try to visit when I can. It must be hard having family so far away." "It is," Nathan admitted, "but Nora is happy, and that is what matters." She always wanted to live in a bigger town, somewhere with more society and culture. Ranch life was never really her dream. Me, I cannot imagine living anywhere else. I like the open spaces, the work, the rhythm of the seasons. Every day is different, but there is a pattern to it that feels right. Grace understood exactly what he meant. "I feel the same way about Cherry Creek. It is small, but it is home. I know everyone, and everyone knows me. There is comfort in that, even if it means everyone also knows your business." Nathan laughed, a warm sound that seemed to push back the gloom of the storm. "That is the truth. Small-town life means no secrets. If you sneeze in the morning, by afternoon someone will be bringing you soup and advice about your health." "Exactly," Grace said, laughing with him. "Last month I accidentally burned a batch of biscuits, and within 3 days 5 different women had stopped by to offer me their never-fail biscuit recipes. Did any of them work? Actually, yes. Mrs. Patterson's recipe is excellent. I have been using it ever since." They talked for over an hour as the storm raged outside. Nathan told her about working on the Broken Arrow, about the cattle drives and the daily challenges of ranch life. Grace shared stories about her customers, the funny requests she sometimes received, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her own hands. She learned that Nathan was 26 years old, that he had been working ranches since he was 15, and that his dream was to one day own his own spread. He learned that Grace was 23, that she loved to read novels when she had spare time, and that she had a talent for painting landscapes, though she rarely had time to indulge in it. The rain finally began to ease as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. The thunder moved off into the distance, and the lightning became less frequent. Nathan stood and walked to the edge of their shelter, looking out at the clearing sky. "I think the worst has passed," he said. "We should be able to make it back to Cherry Creek before full dark if we leave now." Grace felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Despite the discomfort and the circumstances, she had enjoyed this unexpected time with Nathan. He was easy to talk to, and she found herself wishing they had more time together. They prepared to leave, checking the horses and gathering their bearings. Dahlia seemed completely recovered from her earlier panic, and Grace was able to mount without any trouble. Nathan swung into his own saddle with practiced grace. "Stay close," he said. "The ground will be muddy and treacherous. We will take it slow." The ride back to Cherry Creek took nearly 2 hours. The fading light made navigation difficult, and they had to pick their way carefully through the muddy terrain. But Nathan seemed to know every inch of the land, guiding them with confidence even in the near darkness. By the time the lights of Cherry Creek came into view, full night had fallen, and Grace was exhausted, wet, and sore. "Where is your house?" Nathan asked as they entered the main street of the small town. "Just past the general store on the left, the white house with the blue shutters." Nathan nodded and led the way. When they reached Grace's home, he dismounted and came to help her down from Dahlia. His hands were warm and steady on her waist, and Grace felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger or exhaustion. The front door flew open before they even reached the porch, and Grace's mother rushed out, her face a mixture of relief and worry. "Grace, oh, thank God. I have been beside myself. When the storm came and you did not return, I thought the worst." She pulled Grace into a fierce embrace, then seemed to notice Nathan for the first time. "Who is this?" "This is Nathan Ingram, Mama. He found me in the storm and helped me get home safely. If not for him, I might still be out there, or worse." Mrs. Whitmore turned her full attention to Nathan, and Grace could see her mother assessing him with the sharp eye of a woman who had raised a daughter alone for 3 years. Then, "I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Ingram. Please come inside. You must be as wet and cold as Grace. I insist you have some hot food and coffee before you continue on your way." "That is very kind, madam, but I do not want to impose," Nathan said, but Mrs. Whitmore was already ushering them both inside. "Nonsense. It is the least I can do for the man who brought my daughter home safe. Now both of you inside. Grace, go change into dry clothes immediately. Mr. Ingram, I will find something of my late husband's for you to wear while your things dry by the fire." Grace caught Nathan's eye and saw the amusement there. He mouthed the word bossy, and she had to suppress a laugh. Her mother was indeed bossy, but it came from a place of love and care, and Grace would not have changed her for anything. Half an hour later, Grace came back downstairs in a dry dress, her hair combed and pinned up properly. Nathan was sitting at the kitchen table wearing one of her father's old shirts, which was slightly too small across the shoulders but serviceable. His own clothes were hanging by the fire, steaming gently. Mrs. Whitmore was bustling around the kitchen, preparing food with the efficiency of a general marshalling troops. "Sit, Grace. You must eat. And Mr. Ingram, tell me about yourself. Grace mentioned you work at the Broken Arrow." Over plates of beef stew and fresh bread, Nathan answered Mrs. Whitmore's questions with patience and good humor. Grace watched the two of them interact, pleased to see that her mother seemed to approve of the cowboy. It was clear in the way her expression softened, the way she offered him second helpings, the way she laughed at his stories. When the meal was finished and Nathan's clothes were mostly dry, he reluctantly announced that he needed to head back to the ranch. My boss will wonder what happened to me, he said. I was supposed to be back hours ago. Will you be in trouble? Grace asked, concerned. No, Mr. Cartwright is a fair man. He will understand once I explain, but I should get back nonetheless. Grace walked him to the door while her mother discreetly busied herself in the kitchen. Outside, the night was clear now, stars brilliant in the washed sky. Nathan's horse, Ranger, waited patiently at the hitching post. Thank you, Grace said, for everything. I truly do not know what would have happened if you had not come along. I am glad I was there, Nathan said, and I am glad you are safe. He hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, then seemed to make a decision. Miss Whitmore, Grace, I know we just met, and this might be forward of me, but I would like to see you again. Not because of what happened today, but because I genuinely enjoyed talking with you. I felt like I could say anything and you would understand. That is rare. Grace's heart sped up. I felt the same way, she admitted. And yes, I would like that very much. I come into Cherry Creek most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps I could call on you this weekend, if that is acceptable to you and your mother. It is more than acceptable, Grace said. It would be wonderful. Nathan's smile was brilliant even in the darkness. Then I will see you Saturday, Grace Whitmore. Until then, stay out of storms. She laughed. I will do my best. Grace watched him ride away into the night, her hand raised in farewell until he disappeared from view. When she turned back to the house, her mother was standing in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. Well, Mrs. Whitmore said, that is an interesting development. Mama, do not start. I am not starting anything. I am merely observing that Nathan Ingram is a fine young man, and the way he looked at you over dinner suggested he thinks you are something special. We only just met, Grace protested, but she could not keep the smile from her face. Sometimes that is all it takes, her mother said wisely. Your father and I knew within a day of meeting that we would marry. When it is right, you just know. Grace wanted to tell her mother not to get ahead of herself, that it was too soon to talk about such things, but part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, her mother was right. There had been something in those hours sheltering from the storm, something that felt like the beginning of something important. That night, Grace lay in her bed listening to the peaceful sounds of the house settling around her. She thought about Nathan's gray-blue eyes, his steady presence, the way he had taken charge without making her feel helpless. She thought about how natural it had felt to talk with him, how the conversation had flowed without awkward pauses or forced topics. And she thought about Saturday, counting the days until she would see him again. Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Grace found herself watching the clock all morning as she worked in her shop, measuring and cutting fabric for a new dress order, but finding her mind wandering to thoughts of Nathan. Would he really come? Had he meant what he said, or had it been just the emotion of the moment speaking? At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she heard a knock on the front door of her house, which was attached to her shop. Grace smoothed her dress, checked her hair in the small mirror by the door, and tried to calm her racing heart before opening it. Nathan stood on her porch, hat in hand, wearing clean clothes and a nervous smile. Good afternoon, Grace. I hope I am not too early. You are right on time, Grace said, stepping back to let him in. Please come in. Her mother appeared from the parlor, greeting Nathan warmly. Mr. Ingram, how lovely to see you again. Grace has been looking forward to your visit. Mama, Grace said, mortified, but Nathan just grinned. I have been looking forward to it as well, Mrs. Whitmore. They spent the afternoon in the parlor with Mrs. Whitmore acting as chaperone but giving them enough privacy to actually talk. Nathan brought Grace a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town, and the gesture touched her more than expensive roses could have. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions on books they had both read, debating the merits of different types of horses, and laughing over stories from their respective childhoods. When Nathan finally left as evening approached, he asked if he could call again the following Saturday, and Grace agreed without hesitation. Thus began a pattern that would continue for the next 2 months. Every Saturday, Nathan would ride into Cherry Creek to see Grace. Sometimes they would sit in the parlor talking. Sometimes they would take walks through town, Grace's hand resting lightly on Nathan's arm as they strolled past the familiar buildings and greeted neighbors. Once, Nathan brought a picnic lunch and they rode out to a pretty spot by the creek that ran near town, spending hours by the water talking and laughing. With each visit, Grace felt herself falling deeper. Nathan was everything she had ever wanted in a man without knowing she wanted it. He was strong but gentle, hardworking but not consumed by his work, ambitious but not ruthless. He treated her with respect but also with a warmth that made her feel cherished. And the way he looked at her, as if she were the most beautiful and fascinating woman in the world, made her heart sing. She could see that he was falling too. It was in the way his eyes lit up when he saw her, the way he found excuses to touch her hand or help her over a puddle even when she did not need help, the way he talked about his future and increasingly included the word we instead of I. On a Saturday in late July, Nathan arrived at the Whitmore house with an air of barely suppressed excitement. "Grace," he said as soon as they were settled in the parlor, "I have news. Good news, I hope." "What is it?" Grace asked, intrigued by his manner. "You know I have been saving money for years, hoping to one day buy my own land and start my own ranch. Well, a property has come up for sale. It is not large, only about 300 acres, but it has good grazing land, a decent water source, and a small house that needs some work but is livable. It is about 5 miles from Cherry Creek, close enough that town is accessible but far enough to have real space. Mr. Cartwright has agreed to give me a loan for the portion I cannot cover with my savings, and I have been approved by the bank. Grace, I am going to have my own ranch." Grace jumped up from her chair, her excitement matching his. "Nathan, that is wonderful. I am so happy for you. You have worked so hard for this." Nathan stood as well, taking her hands in his. "I wanted to tell you first because your opinion matters to me more than anyone else's. And because I very much hope, that you might want to be a part of this future I am building." Grace's breath caught. "Nathan, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Grace Whitmore. I have loved you since that day in the storm when you stood in the rain talking to your frightened horse, trying to be brave even though you were scared. I love the way you laugh, the way you see beauty in small things, the way you care about people. I love your strength and your kindness and your sharp wit. I love everything about you, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, his gray-blue eyes looking up at her with such intensity that Grace felt tears spring to her own eyes. "I know we have only known each other for a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Grace, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense and build a life with me on this land I am buying?" "Yes," Grace said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, Nathan, of course yes. I love you too. I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon. But it does not feel too soon. It feels exactly right." Nathan surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her for the first time. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, of relief and joy, and Grace felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "You have just made me the happiest man in Nevada," he said. "And you have made me the happiest woman," Grace replied. They heard a discreet cough from the doorway and turned to see Mrs. Whitmore standing there, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I take it congratulations are in order. We are getting married, Mama," Grace said, unable to keep the grin from her face. Mrs. Whitmore opened her arms and Grace rushed into them. "I am so happy for you, darling. Nathan is a good man, and I know he will take care of you. Your father would have approved." Nathan shook Mrs. Whitmore's hand solemnly. "I promise I will do everything in my power to make Grace happy, madam. She means the world to me." "I can see that," Mrs. Whitmore said, smiling. "And I believe you. Now, when is this wedding to be? I assume you will want to be married before you move to the new ranch." Nathan and Grace looked at each other. "As soon as possible," Nathan said. "I close on the property in 3 weeks. I was hoping we might marry before then so Grace can come with me from the start, but I understand if that is too rushed." "It is not too rushed," Grace said firmly. 2 weeks from today. That gives us time to plan a simple ceremony and for me to make a dress. Mama, will that work, Mrs. Whitmore nodded. "If that is what you want, then we will make it happen. It will be a small wedding, but we will make it beautiful." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Grace closed her dress shop temporarily to focus on preparations, though she made sure to finish the orders she had already committed to. She spent long hours sewing her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Nathan split his time between finishing his duties at the Broken Arrow, making arrangements for the new ranch, and helping Grace and her mother with wedding preparations. They decided to hold the ceremony at the small church in Cherry Creek, with the reception at the Whitmore house. The guest list was kept small, just close friends and neighbors, but the whole town seemed to be excited about the wedding. Grace's customers brought gifts, and Nathan's co-workers from the Broken Arrow promised to attend. On the morning of the wedding, Grace woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She lay in her bed, looking around the room that had been hers since childhood, knowing this was the last morning she would wake up in this house as Grace Whitmore. By nightfall, she would be Grace Ingram, a married woman starting a new life. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She loved Nathan with her whole heart, had no doubts about that. But marriage was such a big step, and the ranch would be a dramatic change from her life in town. She would be leaving her mother, her shop, the routines and familiarity of the only home she had ever known. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into unknown waters. "Grace, darling, are you awake?" Her mother's voice came softly through the door. "Yes, Mama, come in." Mrs. Whitmore entered, carrying a tray with tea and toast. "I thought you might want some breakfast. It is going to be a long day." They sat together on Grace's bed, sipping tea and talking quietly. "Are you nervous?" her mother asked. "A little," Grace admitted. "It is such a big change." "It is," Mrs. Whitmore agreed. "But it is a good change. Nathan loves you, Grace. I see it every time he looks at you, and you love him. That is the foundation you need for a good marriage. Everything else you will figure out together." "I will miss you," Grace said, her voice breaking slightly. "And I will miss you terribly," her mother said, squeezing her hand. "But you are not going far. 5 miles is nothing. I will visit often and you will come to town regularly. This is not goodbye, sweetheart. It is just a new chapter." Grace hugged her mother tightly, drawing strength from her presence. "Thank you, Mama, for everything. For supporting me, for loving Nathan, for helping make this day possible." "It is my joy," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Now let us get you ready to marry the man you love." The ceremony took place at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The church was filled with the scent of wildflowers, which decorated every available surface. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden light over the assembled guests. Grace stood in the back of the church, her hand on her mother's arm, and looked down the aisle to where Nathan waited. He looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love and anticipation that Grace felt tears prick her eyes. This was real. This was happening. In just a few moments, she would walk down that aisle and become his wife. The music began. A simple melody played on the church's old piano by Mrs. Henderson, who taught music to the local children. Grace began walking, her eyes never leaving Nathan's face. She saw his expression shift from anticipation to wonder as he watched her approach, and she knew her own face must be showing the same emotions. When she reached the altar, Nathan took her hand, his fingers warm and steady around hers. The minister began the ceremony, but Grace barely heard the words. She was too focused on Nathan, on the promises they were about to make to each other, on the life that was beginning. Do you, Nathan Ingram, take Grace Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? I do, Nathan said, his voice clear and strong. And do you, Grace Whitmore, take Nathan Ingram to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? I do, Grace said, her own voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride. Nathan stepped closer, his hands cupping Grace's face gently, and kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt a tear slip down her cheek. When they pulled apart, the church erupted in applause and cheers, and Grace laughed, feeling lighter and happier than she could ever remember. The reception at the Whitmore house was a joyful celebration. Tables laden with food filled the yard, and neighbors had contributed their specialties, from roasted chickens to fresh pies to bottles of homemade wine. Grace and Nathan moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, but Grace found her eyes constantly seeking Nathan's, drawn to him as if by a magnet. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Nathan leaned close to Grace and whispered, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Ingram?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." They said their goodbyes, Grace hugging her mother for a long moment and promising to visit soon. Then Nathan helped her into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion, which held her belongings and the wedding gifts they had received. With a final wave to the assembled guests, they set off down the road toward their new home. The ranch, which Nathan had named the Double I Ranch for their shared last initial, was located in a beautiful valley with views of the distant mountains. The house was small but sturdy, built of wood with a wide front porch. Nathan had spent the last week cleaning and making basic repairs, and he had tried to make it as comfortable as possible for Grace's arrival. He helped her down from the wagon, and then, before she could move toward the house, he swept her up in his arms. "Nathan," Grace exclaimed, laughing. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" he said, grinning. "It is tradition, is it not?" He carried her into the house and set her down gently in the main room. It was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace on one wall, a table and chairs Nathan had made himself, and a braided rug on the floor. Through an open door, Grace could see the bedroom, and she felt her cheeks warm at the implications. Nathan seemed to sense her nervousness. "Would you like to see the rest of the place before it gets dark? I can show you the barn and the land." Grateful for the reprieve, Grace nodded. They spent the next hour walking the property as Nathan pointed out various features and shared his plans for the future. He wanted to start with cattle, maybe 50 head to begin with, and gradually build the herd. He had ideas for where to plant a vegetable garden, where to expand the barn, were to eventually build a larger house when they had the money. "I know it is not much now," he said as they stood on a small rise looking over the valley. "But I promise you, Grace, I will work hard to make this into something special, a real home for us and for the family I hope we will have someday." Grace took his hand. "It is already special, Nathan, because it is ours. I do not need a grand house or a huge ranch. I just need you and a place where we can build our life together. This is perfect." The sincerity in her voice seemed to move Nathan deeply. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist, and they stood together watching the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. When full darkness fell, they returned to the house. Nathan lit the lamps while Grace looked around, starting to plan where things should go, how she might make the space more comfortable and homey. She noticed that Nathan had brought in wildflowers and placed them in a jar on the table, a simple gesture that touched her heart. "I wanted you to have flowers on your wedding day," he said, noticing her looking at them. "I know they are just wildflowers, not fancy roses or anything, but they reminded me of that first day when I brought you flowers." "They are beautiful," Grace said. "And they mean more because you thought of it." An awkward silence fell between them. They were married now, alone in their house, and the implications of that were suddenly very present. Grace twisted her hands together, nervous despite her love for Nathan. Nathan crossed the room and took her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "Grace, I want you to know that we do not have to do anything you are not ready for. I know this is all new and probably overwhelming. We can take things as slowly as you need." His kindness and consideration melted Grace's nervousness. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. "I am nervous," she admitted, "but I am also your wife and I want to be your wife in every way. I love you, Nathan. I trust you." Nathan's eyes darkened with emotion. He leaned down and kissed her, soft at first and then with growing passion. Grace responded, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. He lifted her again, carrying her to the bedroom, and Grace closed her eyes, letting herself feel everything. The love and the desire and the rightness of being here with this man who was now her husband. Later, as they lay tangled together in the bed, Grace rested her head on Nathan's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. His arm was wrapped around her, holding her close, and she felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Are you all right?" Nathan asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Better than all right," Grace said. "I am happy, Nathan, truly, completely happy." "Good," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "That is all I want, to make you happy." "You do," Grace assured him. "Every single day." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Grace dreamed of the future they would build together. The first months of married life were both wonderful and challenging. Grace had to adapt to the rhythms of ranch life, which were very different from her life in town. She woke before dawn to cook breakfast for Nathan before he started his day's work. She learned to tend chickens, manage a vegetable garden, and handle the dozens of small tasks that came with running a homestead. It was hard work, much harder than she had anticipated, and there were days when she was so tired by evening that she could barely keep her eyes open through supper. But there were also moments of pure joy. Riding out with Nathan to check on the cattle, sitting behind him on his horse with her arms around his waist. Quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their day. Nights in each other's arms, learning and loving and discovering new depths to their relationship. Slowly but surely, the little house began to feel like home. In October, Grace realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be sure, then rode into Cherry Creek to see Dr. Matthews, the town physician. His examination confirmed what she had suspected. "You are with child, Mrs. Ingram," he said with a smile. "About 2 months along, I would estimate. Congratulations." Grace rode back to the ranch in a daze of happiness and nerves. She was going to be a mother. She and Nathan were going to have a baby. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She was only 23 years old, and while she had always assumed she would have children someday, the reality of it actually happening was overwhelming. She decided to wait to tell Nathan, wanting to plan something special. That evening she made his favorite meal, beef stew with fresh biscuits and apple pie for dessert. When they had finished eating and were sitting on the porch in the cool evening air, Grace took a deep breath and said, "Nathan, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately picking up on the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is very right, actually. Nathan, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Nathan just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he was grinning like a fool. He jumped up from his chair and pulled Grace to her feet, lifting her and spinning her around. "We are having a baby. Grace, we are having a baby." He set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass. "When? How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting down?" Grace laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I am due in late May, so about 7 months from now. I am feeling fine, just a little tired sometimes. And no, I do not need to sit down. I am pregnant, not ill." But Nathan had already guided her back to her chair, his face creased with concern. "You need to take it easy. No more heavy lifting. I will hire someone to help around the house." "Nathan, we cannot afford to hire help, and I do not need it anyway. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while doing their regular work. I promise I will be careful, but I am not going to spend the next 7 months sitting around doing nothing." They compromised. Grace would continue with her regular tasks, but would let Nathan handle anything that involved heavy lifting or climbing. He became almost comically protective, constantly asking how she was feeling and trying to do things for her that she was perfectly capable of doing herself. Grace found it both endearing and occasionally exasperating, but she understood it came from a place of love and concern. As fall turned to winter, Grace's pregnancy became more obvious. Her dresses had to be let out to accommodate her growing belly, and she found herself moving more slowly and tiring more easily. Nathan's protectiveness only increased, and he made sure she had everything she could possibly need. In December, they received exciting news. Nathan's sister, Nora, wrote to say that she and her husband were coming for a visit over Christmas. Grace was thrilled at the prospect of meeting Nathan's sister, and Nathan was overjoyed that Nora would finally see the ranch and meet Grace. Nora and her family arrived a few days before Christmas. She was a pretty woman with Nathan's same gray-blue eyes and a warm smile. Her husband Thomas was a quiet man with gentle manners, and their daughter Clara was a delightful toddler with dark curls and a ready laugh. Nora and Grace bonded immediately. They spent hours talking while the men worked on various ranch projects, and Nora shared advice about pregnancy and childbirth that Grace found invaluable. She felt as if she was gaining not just a sister-in-law but a true friend. On Christmas Eve, they all sat around the fireplace in the little house, which Grace had decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. They sang carols, exchanged simple gifts, and ate a feast that Grace and Nora had prepared together. Grace looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, Nathan beside her with his hand resting on her pregnant belly, Nora and Thomas laughing at something Clara had done, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. This was family. This was home. This was everything she had ever wanted without knowing she wanted it. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Grace's belly grew larger, and she began to feel the baby moving inside her. Small flutters at first and then stronger kicks that sometimes made her gasp. Nathan loved to feel the baby move, his face lighting up with wonder every time he felt a kick under his hand. In early May, as Grace's due date approached, her mother came to stay at the ranch. Mrs. Whitmore wanted to be there for the birth, and Grace was grateful for her presence. Her mother brought a calming energy and practical knowledge that eased Grace's growing anxiety about the approaching labor. The baby decided to arrive on a beautiful May afternoon. Grace's labor started mid-morning with mild cramping that gradually increased in intensity. By early afternoon, the contractions were strong enough that Nathan rode into Cherry Creek to fetch Dr. Matthews. Grace walked around the house and yard, her mother by her side, trying to manage the pain and stay calm. Dr. Matthews arrived in the early evening and the labor intensified. What followed were hours that seemed to stretch into eternity, filled with pain unlike anything Grace had ever experienced. She gripped her mother's hand, trying not to scream, trying to remember to breathe the way Dr. Matthews instructed. Nathan waited outside, pacing the porch, his anxiety palpable even through the walls. Finally, after what felt like days but was probably only a few hours, Dr. Matthews said, "One more push, Grace. You are almost there." Grace gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed, and then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby crying. Relief and joy flooded through her, mixing with exhaustion. "It is a boy," Dr. Matthews announced, placing the squalling infant on Grace's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Grace looked down at her son, his face red and wrinkled, his tiny fists waving, and fell completely in love. She touched his soft cheek with one finger, marveling at how perfect he was. "Can Nathan come in?" she asked. "Of course," her mother said, going to the door. Nathan burst into the room, his face anxious until he saw Grace and the baby. Then his expression transformed into something Grace could only describe as awe. He came to the bedside, looking down at his son with tears in his eyes. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "Grace, you did this. You are amazing." "We did this," Grace corrected. "Together. Do you want to hold him?" Nathan nodded, and Dr. Matthews showed him how to support the baby's head. Nathan took his son carefully, as if holding the most precious treasure in the world, and Grace watched her husband fall in love with their child just as she had. "What should we name him?" Nathan asked. They had discussed names but had not definitively decided on one. Grace looked at her son, thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this moment, about the storm that had introduced her to Nathan, about the new life they were building together. "Noah," she said. "It means peace and rest. Noah Ingram." "Noah," Nathan repeated, smiling. "It is perfect. Welcome to the world, Noah Ingram. We are so happy you are here." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days as Grace and Nathan adjusted to life with a newborn. Noah was a good baby overall, but he needed to be fed every few hours, day and night, and the constant demands of caring for an infant while also managing the household were overwhelming at times. But Grace had never been happier. Watching Nathan with Noah, seeing the gentleness with which he handled their tiny son, the soft voice he used to talk to the baby, the way he would walk the floor at night to soothe Noah when he was fussy, only deepened her love for her husband. And Noah himself was endlessly fascinating. Every small change, a new expression, a source of wonder. Grace's mother stayed for 2 weeks after the birth, helping with cooking and cleaning and offering advice when Grace needed it. When she finally returned to Cherry Creek, Grace felt a pang of sadness but also pride. She was managing. She was learning. She was becoming a mother. The summer passed in a rhythm of feeding and changing and trying to sleep whenever Noah slept. Grace found herself adapting to the chaos, learning to function on less sleep than she had ever imagined possible. Nathan continued working the ranch, but he helped with Noah whenever he was in the house, changing diapers and walking with the baby to give Grace a break. In August, a neighboring rancher approached Nathan about buying some of their cattle. It was good timing, as Nathan had been planning to sell part of the herd anyway before winter. The sale brought in much-needed money, and Nathan immediately began planning how to invest it back into the ranch. "I want to expand the herd next spring," he told Grace one evening as they sat on the porch, Noah sleeping in her arms. "And I am thinking about building a bigger barn. The one we have is adequate, but if we are going to grow, we need more space." "That sounds good," Grace said. "What about the house? You mentioned wanting to expand it eventually." Nathan looked at the little house with a considering expression. "I do want to expand it, especially now that we have Noah and might have more children in the future. But the barn is more urgent for the business." "The house can wait another year or two. Is that all right with you?" "Of course," Grace said. "I agree that the ranch has to be the priority right now. The house is fine for now. It is cozy." Nathan leaned over and kissed her temple. "Thank you for understanding." "I promise, Grace, I am working toward giving you a real home, something you can be proud of." "I am already proud," Grace said. "Of you, of what we are building, of our family. This is exactly where I want to be." As autumn arrived, bringing cooler weather and shorter days, Grace began to feel more like herself again. Noah was sleeping for longer stretches at night, and she was adjusting to her new identity as a mother. She even began to think about perhaps reopening her dress shop in a limited way, taking orders from Cherry Creek customers, and sewing when she had time. The extra income would be helpful, and she missed the creative work. She mentioned the idea to Nathan, expecting him to object or worry about her taking on too much, but he surprised her. "If that is what you want to do, then you should do it," he said. "You have always loved your sewing, and I know you have been missing it. As long as you do not push yourself too hard, I think it is a great idea." Grace hugged him, grateful for his support. The next time she went into Cherry Creek to visit her mother, she spread the word that she was taking orders again. Within a week, she had 3 customers requesting new dresses, and the work felt like a blessing, a reminder that she was more than just a wife and mother. She was also Grace, with her own skills and interests and dreams. The winter of 1884 was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold. Nathan worked long hours keeping the cattle fed and checking for any animals that might be in distress. Grace kept the house warm and meals ready, and cared for Noah, who was growing and changing every day. He was sitting up on his own now and babbling in baby language that sounded almost like real words. On New Year's Eve, as they sat by the fire with Noah playing on a blanket at their feet, Nathan turned to Grace and said, "Do you realize it has been almost 2 years since we met? Since that storm?" Grace smiled, remembering. "It feels like yesterday and like a lifetime ago at the same time. So much has changed." "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Marrying me, coming here, leaving your life in town?" Grace looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Nathan, how could you even ask that?" "I have never regretted a single moment. My life with you is everything I ever wanted. Yes, it is hard sometimes, and yes, I miss certain things about town. But I would not trade this for anything. You and Noah, this ranch, the life we are building, this is my dream come true." Nathan pulled her close, kissing her deeply. "I love you, Grace Ingram, more today than yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "And I love you," Grace said, "always and forever." As the new year began, life on the Double I Ranch continued to evolve. Nathan successfully expanded the herd as planned, and the ranch's reputation began to grow. Other ranchers came to Nathan for advice, impressed by his work ethic and the quality of his cattle. Grace's sewing business picked up, and she found she could manage both motherhood and her work with some careful time management. Noah celebrated his first birthday in May of 1885 with a small party that included Grace's mother, a few neighbors, and surprisingly, Nora and her family, who made the trip from Reno for the occasion. The little house was filled with laughter and love, and Noah delighted everyone by taking his first wobbly steps while everyone watched and cheered. That summer, Nathan began building the new barn he had been planning. He hired 2 local men to help, and the construction took most of the season. Grace would bring lunch out to the work site, and Noah would toddle around in the dirt, fascinated by all the activity. By September, the barn was finished, a sturdy structure that was nearly twice the size of the old one. Nathan was justifiably proud, and Grace organized a small celebration to mark the completion. In the fall, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. The news brought joy mixed with some trepidation. Noah was still so young, and the thought of managing a toddler and a newborn was daunting. But Nathan was thrilled, and his excitement was contagious. "Our family is growing," he said, his hand on her still flat belly. "Our ranch is growing. Everything is coming together just as I hoped it would." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace felt better than she had with Noah, with less nausea and more energy. She continued her sewing work and managed the household while also chasing after an increasingly active Noah. In late May of 1886, Grace gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter and easier than with Noah, and when Dr. Matthews placed the baby in Grace's arms, she looked down at a beautiful girl with a shock of dark hair in her father's eyes. "A daughter," Nathan said wonderingly, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a daughter." "What should we name her?" Grace asked. "You choose," Nathan said. "You chose Noah's name. It is only fair." Grace thought for a moment, then smiled. "Lily. Her name is Lily Ingram." "Lily," Nathan repeated. "It is beautiful, just like her mother." Noah, who was just over 2 years old, was fascinated by his new sister. He would sit next to Grace while she nursed Lily, gently patting the baby's head and saying "baby" over and over. Grace's heart swelled watching her son interact with his sister, imagining the bond they would develop as they grew. The next few years passed in a blur of children and ranching and building a life. The Double I Ranch continued to prosper, allowing Nathan to finally begin expanding the house. He added 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and Grace felt as if they were living in luxury compared to the small house they had started with. Noah grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, desperate to help with ranch work. Lily was a sweet-natured child who loved to sing and play with the wildflowers Grace planted around the house. In 1888, Grace gave birth to another son, whom they named James. And 2 years later, in 1890, their family was completed with the arrival of another daughter, Rose. 4 children made for a chaotic household. There were always meals to prepare, clothes to wash, scraped knees to bandage, and disputes to mediate. But there was also laughter and love, and the deep satisfaction of watching her children grow. Grace continued her sewing work when she could, and Nathan's ranch continued to expand and thrive. On their 10th wedding anniversary in July of 1893, Nathan surprised Grace with a picnic at the spot by the creek where they had spent one of their first dates. Grace's mother came to watch the children, and for a few hours, Nathan and Grace were just a couple again, not parents or ranchers or business owners. 10 years, Grace marveled, leaning against Nathan's shoulder as they watched the water flow past. A decade since we married. The best decade of my life, Nathan said. Though I have to admit, it has been more eventful than I anticipated. 4 children, a successful ranch, and you still somehow find time to sew dresses for half the women in the county. Grace laughed. I have good help. And you make it possible by being such a wonderful father and husband. I could not do any of this without you. We are a team, Nathan said. We always have been, since that first day when we stood together in the storm. You, me, and one scared horse. You ever think about that day? Grace asked. About how random it was. If you had been 10 minutes earlier or later, if the storm had not come, if Dahlia had not been so frightened, we might never have met. I think about it sometimes, Nathan admitted. And I thank God for every bit of chance and timing that brought us together. I cannot imagine my life without you, Grace. You are my partner, my best friend, my love. Everything good in my life stems from that day when I found you in the storm. Grace turned to kiss him, putting all her love and gratitude into it. And you were my rescue in more ways than one. You gave me adventure and love and a family and a home. You gave me everything. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking and remembering and simply enjoying each other's company. When they returned home, their children rushed to greet them, all 4 talking at once about what they had done while their parents were gone. Grace scooped up Rose, who was only 3, while Nathan hoisted James onto his shoulders. Noah and Lily grabbed their hands and they all went into the house together, a family united. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Noah, at 12, was already a skilled rider and a real help to Nathan on the ranch. Lily, at 10, had developed Grace's talent for sewing and spent hours at her mother's side learning the craft. James, at 8, was the family comedian, always ready with a joke or a silly face to make his siblings laugh. And Rose, at 6, was the baby of the family, sweet and affectionate and beloved by everyone. In 1895, Nathan made a decision that would change the ranch significantly. A neighboring property came up for sale, and after much discussion with Grace, he decided to buy it. The purchase nearly doubled their land and gave them access to a better water source. It also put them further into debt, which worried Grace, but Nathan was confident they could manage. I believe in what we are building here, he told her. This ranch is going to be something our children can inherit, something that will support generations of our family. It is worth the risk. Grace trusted his judgment. Over the years, Nathan had proven himself to be a shrewd businessman and a hard worker. She knew that if anyone could make this expansion successful, it was him. The additional land did prove beneficial. The larger herd brought in more income, and within 2 years they had paid off a significant portion of the loan. The Double I Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in the area, and Nathan was frequently consulted by other ranchers seeking advice. As the new century approached, Grace found herself reflecting on the journey she and Nathan had taken together. From that frightened young woman in a storm to a confident ranch wife and mother, she had grown and changed in ways she never could have imagined. And through it all, Nathan had been by her side, her constant support and love. On New Year's Eve of 1899, as the family gathered to celebrate the coming of a new century, Nathan raised his glass and made a toast. To my wife, Grace, who has given me everything worth having in this world. To our children, Noah, Lily, James, and Rose, who bring us joy every single day. To the ranch that supports us and the land that sustains us. And to the future, whatever it may bring. May we face it together as we always have. Together, Grace echoed, her glass touching Nathan's as their children cheered around them. The early years of the 20th century brought both triumph and tragedy to the Ingram family. In 1902, Noah, now 19, announced his intention to marry a local girl named Sarah Mitchell. Grace and Nathan gave their blessing, delighted to see their eldest son so happy. The wedding was held at the ranch, with the whole community invited, and Grace cried happy tears as she watched Noah and Sarah exchange vows under an arch of wildflowers. But the following year brought heartbreak when Grace's mother, who had been such a constant presence in their lives, fell ill with pneumonia and passed away within a week. Grace was devastated by the loss, and it was Nathan who held her through the dark days of grief, just as she had supported him through various challenges over the years. "She loved you so much," Nathan told Grace as they sat together after the funeral. "And she was so proud of the life you built, the family you raised. She told me once that finding me in that storm was the best thing that ever happened to you, and I was the luckiest man alive to have you." "She said that?" Grace asked, tears streaming down her face. "She did. Many times. Your mother approved of me from the start, but over the years she came to genuinely love me as a son. I will miss her." "So will I," Grace whispered. "So much." Time, as it always does, helped heal the grief. Life on the ranch continued with new challenges and joys to occupy their attention. Lily married in 1904, choosing a schoolteacher named Daniel Wright, who shared her love of books and learning. James declared his intention to become a veterinarian and began studying with Dr. Matthews, learning animal medicine. And Rose, the baby, grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's talent for art and her father's head for business. In 1906, Nathan and Grace celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a huge party, inviting everyone they had ever known. The ranch was filled with people, laughter, and music. Noah and Sarah, who now had 3 children of their own, acted as hosts. Lily and Daniel, expecting their first child, helped serve the food. James demonstrated his veterinary skills by successfully treating a neighbor's injured dog. And Rose played the piano while guests danced. As Grace looked around at the gathered crowd, at the ranch that had grown so much from those humble beginnings, at her children and grandchildren, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She found Nathan standing near the new barn, watching the celebration with a satisfied smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "About how far we have come," he said. "About that young cowboy who found a woman with a scared horse in a storm and somehow convinced her to build a life with him. About how every single thing I hoped for came true and then some." "I was thinking the same thing," Grace said. 25 years, 4 children, 3 grandchildren and 1 on the way. A ranch that is everything you dreamed it would be. Nathan, we did it. We built something real and lasting." "We did," Nathan agreed. "And I want you to know, Grace, that I love you more today than I did on our wedding day. Every year, every challenge, every joy has only deepened what I feel for you. You are my heart, my home, my everything." Grace reached up and kissed him, not caring that people might be watching. "And you are mine. You were from that very first day, even though I did not know it yet. My cowboy who stood with me in the storm and promised we would wait together. You have been keeping that promise ever since, standing with me through every storm life has brought." "And I always will," Nathan said. "Until my last breath, I will stand with you." The party continued late into the night, and Grace danced with Nathan under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved and the life they had built together. It was a moment of perfect happiness, the kind that comes from years of hard work and deep love and unwavering commitment. As they grew older, Nathan and Grace began to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Noah took over more of the management, proving himself to be as capable as his father. The other children pursued their own paths, but they all remained close to the ranch and to each other. The Ingram family had become a fixture in Cherry Creek and the surrounding area, known for their integrity, hard work, and generosity. In 1913, Nathan and Grace celebrated their 30th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. They sat on the porch of the house that had grown and changed so much over the years, holding hands and watching the sunset. "We are getting old," Nathan observed with a rueful smile. He was 52 now, his hair more gray than brown, his face lined from years of working in the sun. "We are," Grace agreed. She was 48, her own hair streaked with silver, but her eyes still sparkled with the same vitality they had when she was 23. "But I would not change a thing. Growing old with you has been the greatest privilege of my life." "I feel the same," Nathan said. "I look at our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, and I know that my life has mattered. We created something that will outlast us, Grace. That is a good feeling." "It is," Grace said, "but we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still. More grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch, more time together." "I hope so," Nathan said, "because I am not nearly ready to be done loving you." As if to prove his point, Nathan stood and offered Grace his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet and into his arms. There, on the porch where they had spent countless evenings over 30 years, they danced slowly to music only they could hear. Two people who had found each other in a storm and built a love that had weathered every challenge life threw at them. The years continued to pass, each one a blessing. More grandchildren were born, growing the Ingram family into a small clan. The ranch continued to prosper under Noah's management, and Nathan spent his time mentoring his son and enjoying semi-retirement. Grace finally closed her dressmaking business, deciding she would rather spend her time with her family than working, though she still sewed for pleasure and for her grandchildren. In 1923, as Nathan and Grace prepared to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary, they received word that a journalist from a Reno newspaper wanted to interview them. Apparently, their story of building a successful ranch and raising a large family had attracted attention, and the journalist thought readers would be interested in hearing about their life. Grace was hesitant, but Nathan convinced her to agree. The journalist, a young woman named Margaret, arrived at the ranch on a sunny June morning and spent the day talking with Nathan and Grace, touring the property, and meeting their children and grandchildren. "So tell me," Margaret said as they sat on the porch in the afternoon, "how did you two meet? There must be a story there." Nathan and Grace looked at each other and smiled. "There is definitely a story," Grace said. She told the tale of that May day in 1883, when a storm caught her on the road, and her horse refused to move. She described Nathan appearing through the rain like a hero from a novel, his calm competence in the face of her panic. Nathan added his perspective, talking about how he had been immediately drawn to Grace's determination and courage. "I unhitched her horse and said we would wait together until the storm passed," Nathan said. "It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. I had no idea that decision would change my entire life." "But it did," Grace said, reaching for Nathan's hand. "That moment, that choice to wait together, it set the pattern for our entire marriage. We have faced every challenge together, supported each other through every difficulty, celebrated every joy side by side. That is the secret to a lasting marriage, I think. Finding someone you want to wait out the storms with and building a life together one day at a time." Margaret scribbled notes frantically. "That is beautiful," she said. "And clearly it has worked. 40 years of marriage, 4 successful children, a thriving ranch. You are proof that true love can last. The article, when it was published, caused quite a stir. People from all over wrote letters to Nathan and Grace, inspired by their story. Some were young couples looking for advice. Others were older people who saw their own long marriages reflected in the Ingram story. Grace answered as many letters as she could, touched by the response. The 40th anniversary party was even larger than the 25th had been. All 4 children were there with their families, bringing the total to more than 20 people when you counted all the grandchildren. Neighbors and friends came from miles around to celebrate with the Ingrams. It was a joyful, chaotic gathering that perfectly captured the life Nathan and Grace had built together. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Nathan and Grace stood together looking at their family. Noah and Sarah were organizing their grandchildren, trying to get the youngest ones ready for bed. Lily and Daniel were helping clean up, their own children pitching in. James, who had indeed become a successful veterinarian, was examining a puppy that one of the grandchildren had found. And Rose, who had married a banker from Reno and had moved to the city but visited often, was playing the piano and singing with a group of her nieces and nephews. "We did all right, didn't we?" Nathan said softly. "We did better than all right," Grace replied. "We did magnificently." They lived to see their 50th anniversary in 1933. By then, Nathan was 72 and Grace was 68. Age had slowed them both, but they were still sharp in mind and devoted to each other. The celebration was smaller this time, with Nathan's health not up to a large party, but their entire family gathered at the ranch for a quiet dinner and an afternoon of reminiscing. As they sat together that evening, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once played, Grace felt a deep sense of peace and completion. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. She had been loved by a good man for 50 years, had raised children who were happy and successful, had helped build something lasting and valuable. "No regrets?" Nathan asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Not a single one," Grace said. "Except perhaps that I did not tell you I loved you sooner. I wasted weeks being afraid when I knew almost from the start that you were the one." Nathan chuckled. "Well, we made up for lost time over the years. I have been told I love you more times than I can count, and I never get tired of hearing it." "I love you," Grace said, right on cue. "Now and always." "And I love you," Nathan replied. "My Grace, my partner, my love, thank you for saying yes to that young cowboy in the storm. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for everything." They sat together as the sun set, hands clasped, hearts full, grateful for every moment they had been given. 2 people who had met by chance in a storm and built a love that had lasted 50 years and would, in the stories told by their children and grandchildren, last for generations to come. Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1935. He was 74 years old, and he died as he had lived, with Grace by his side. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Nathan had touched over the years. Grace stood straight and strong as they lowered her husband into the ground, holding the hands of her children, supported by the family she and Nathan had created together. The grief was profound, but Grace found comfort in her memories and in the legacy she and Nathan had left behind. The Double I Ranch continued under Noah's stewardship, thriving and growing. Her other children were settled and happy. She had 14 grandchildren and already several great-grandchildren, with more on the way. Nathan's dream of creating something lasting had come true in ways even he could not have imagined. Grace lived another 7 years, spending her time with her family and keeping Nathan's memory alive through stories. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the cowboy who had appeared in a storm and changed her life, about the love they had built together, about the importance of standing by the people you love through every challenge. She passed away in the summer of 1942, at the age of 77, dying peacefully in her sleep much as Nathan had. Her children buried her next to Nathan on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Grace Whitmore Ingram, beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She waited out every storm. The story of Nathan and Grace Ingram became part of the folklore of Cherry Creek, a tale told and retold of true love and perseverance. The Double I Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to the life they had built together. And on stormy days, when the rain pounded down and the lightning split the sky, people would sometimes speak of the cowboy and the woman with the frightened horse, of the decision to wait together that had changed two lives forever. And they would remember that the best things in life often begin in the most unexpected moments.